Welcome to Galaxy Moth Podcast, a show dedicated to queer and trans books. I'm Moth, founder of Galaxy Press Books. My pronouns are they, them. Today I'm joined by author Steve Hugh Westenra. Steve, before I share your bio, could you say hello to our listeners and let us know your pronouns?
Hello, listeners. I'm Steve. My pronouns are he, him.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm so glad you're here. And I'm going to go ahead and read your bio while you listen and just bask in it. And um, okay, so Steve is a trans author of fantasy, science fiction, and horror. Basically, if it's weird, he writes it. He's also a book reviewer for Before We Go blog, a SF Inks judge, and runs the trans reading group Discord. He grew up on the eldritch shores of Newfoundland, Canada, and currently lives and works in the slightly less eldritch Montreal. He holds advanced degrees in Russian literature, medieval studies, and religious studies. His current academic work focuses on marginalized reclamations of monstrous figures. He has taught the history of Satan, religion and its monsters, and magic, witchcraft, and religion. Steve is passionate about queerness, late antiquity, and spiders. All right. Wonderful. Yeah, I wanted to just go a little extra on that. That's a great bio.
It's a really good job. I'm reading it like dramatically. Yeah,
Yes, and spiders. Oh my gosh, they're so cute.
they
So
are. They're
I
friends.
I I don't know how true this is. I didn't really like chase it down, but I read that spiders have some behavioral characteristics similar to cats. And
Mm.
after I read that, my wife and I both were like, we love spiders now.
Oh. If there's anything to like pull in, like, potential new spider fans, it's got to be like they're kind of like cats.
Yes, we get the cat people and the spider
Yeah.
people.
We'll just have
So,
Spider Day. It doesn't sound as good as Saturday, but like we'll workshop that.
yes. Okay, I like
Yeah.
it. It has potential. Okay, well, Steve, let's dive right in. We are focusing today on the erstwhile Tyler Kyle, and we'll also talk about writing some writing craft type questions. So, let's to get started. Tell us a bit about your book so we have some grounding, our context around our bigger convo.
Yeah, no problem. So, I'll just, it's starting to sound so rehearsed now, but I'll just do my little elevator pitch. So I'll try not to sound like I've said it like thousands of times. Um, but it's about a cryptid hunting YouTuber, who follows a, possibly fake videotape of his presumed dead, B-movie bombshell mother, to an isolated island in the Canadian wilderness that may house the monsters he swears aren't real, and all while fleeing the, supposedly straight co-host who he drunkenly made out with at an award show in a hot tub. So that's kind of the setup anyway for the story in a nutshell.
Yes. Okay. I love it. So, if our listeners, if you haven't read it, please do. I have been reading it and really enjoying it. So,
Thank
um,
you.
yeah. Okay. So, let's just go right into cryptids because we can. Because we can. So I'm trans, and I've noticed there's a fair number of other trans people that have, let's say, an affinity for cryptids, and it might go beyond affinity for some of us. And so like I wrote a horror romance called The Poison Fruits, and there's a cryptid in it. It's not, let's just say, spoiler alert, it's not a friendly cryptid. So what is the juxtaposition of trans fiction and cryptids stir up for you, like in the imagination?
I think for me, and I'm gonna lean a lot on author Robin Gow's work, I think. So Robin Gow is the author of Dear Mothman, a middle grade novel about a very young, like not like very young, I guess, but like just preteen, trans boy, and he's very, very into Mothman, or becomes very into Mothman following the death of his friend, who was also really into Mothman. Um, and it's a very emotional book. And there's so much in there about like the idea of sort of like visibility and legibility. So, one of the things I would say that is most at stake in a lot of interactions for trans people are both of those things. The sense of legibility, so will others be able to understand you? And not just in terms of like what you're saying, but in terms of like who you are as a person. Are you able to articulate yourself and your identity to others? Are others going to have um, I guess like the lexicon or like the awareness to be able to kind of pick up on those signals that you're sending about who you are, and then sort of visibility, that idea of sort of like being able to hide, or that idea of not being able to help being hidden, being something or someone whose existence is kind of in doubt. And I would say that like those themes come up a lot in Dear Mothman. They're articulated very beautifully by Robin Gao, and I see that as being sort of one of the larger connections between trans people and cryptids, as well as like trans people's interests in cryptids specifically. The idea of um, this creature that kind of nebulously exists. So there's always that question, that kind of, uncertainty over the existence of a cryptid, but the possibility of its existence, as well as its kind of like status as this sort of liminal being, that I think really appeals probably to trans people on some level. I suspect that's like at the heart of, I think, like why we're interested in these figures.
Yeah, it's a figure that, you think about, the clean categorization of all life is a very cishet patriarchal concept that everything can, fit into these neat. Sorry, I mean, I love science, but like
Yeah.
that everything can fit into neat, straight boxes of types of life, and then you
Yeah.
get this creature that, is it supernatural, biological? Is it both? Is it trans-dimensional?
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of like interesting arguments between people for what a cryptid even is, like people
Oh
that are
yeah.
into them. And yeah, so we're definitely, listeners, going to have a future episode that will focus even more on this, and I'm going to call it semiotics of cryptids and
Oh, I
monster
love
fuckers.
that. Yes, yes. I'm deeply invested, very deeply invested in this.
Gonna have to
Yeah.
take the clean rating off of my show, but
Oh wow,
I
yeah.
knew that was gonna happen.
Yeah, I should have asked about swearing. Like I always forget whenever it's something it turns out to be something that I needed to ask about, I forget, and then I always remember to ask when I don't need to. Um, yeah.
No, well, I my first episode that I recorded is a clean episode, but I did not plan to keep it that way, so
Yeah.
that's not in my nature.
Okay, okay. So I haven't like ruined everything or
No,
like you
no, no,
haven't
no,
ruined
no.
everything. Okay.
Not at all. Not at all.
Cool.
You made it better. Let's just be
Yeah, yeah,
real.
yeah. Made it better with swearing.
Swearing is the spice of life.
Yes.
Um, okay, yeah. So I think I want to jump into another kind of area of discussion, and that is to talk a little bit about some writing craft topics. And I'm kind of going to go back and forth on what we're discussing, but I'm always, fascinated to hear how other writers work. And so I would be really curious to hear, what's your writing rhythm or your writing routine, however you kind of think about it. What's it like for you?
Awesome. It's a great question. I feel like I'm really interested in hearing about people's routines and their rhythms and what works for them because it's often so different. And even when we use a kind of like, a tried and true method, the way people implement that method is different. Um, so I think like for me, it's totally random. And it really varies book to book. So like I think the thing I've realized about myself that I'm coming to terms with is that when I try to stick to one particular methodology in terms of like how I'm going to structure my writing time or getting into the groove, I'm only able to sustain that until my brain gets bored of it, and then I need to find a new like formula or something to try and or schedule to try and keep myself able to do it. So for a while I was doing like 5 a.m. Writers Club, if you've heard of that, where you get up at 5 a.m. and other people get up at 5 a.m. and you're all writing. And I really liked that because my brain does tend to be very alert in the morning typically, unless I haven't been sleeping well kind of thing. But even that gradually I just sort of like I don't know how to put it, but my brain got frustrated with it and I just sort of stopped eventually. Or like the Pomodoro method, all of those things, like they'll work for a little while and then I have to like do something else. Like I start to get frustrated by the routine.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is like once I get sort of hyper focused on a book, like that's kind of when things start to get good and start to happen. So like with the Erstwhile Tyler Kyle, I actually wrote that in a really short amount of time. It was like 2 months over like during the pandemic. And like I think especially when I got toward the end of that novel, like I was just like so in the zone that like I could write a lot of words all at once, whereas like early on in the process it was like 100 words. So it really changes throughout the process. Like there's a lot of ebb and flow with me in terms of like my investment in the story and like figuring out getting really just getting into the groove and letting inertia take over. Yeah, I think inertia is big for me. Hopefully that wasn't too rambling an answer.
no, no, that's awesome. And, so in that 2 months of writing the Erstwhile Tyler Kyle, when you came to the finish line for that and you started then, editing, what was that like? Did you use beta readers? Like, how was that kind of process of getting ready to publish?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Like I feel like so I know a lot of people, and this is not a criticism, this is like a just a neutral description. Like a lot of writers really find it helpful to kind of like write as fast as possible, not edit at all throughout the writing process, so that they don't lose that momentum. And I think that's awesome. I kind of tried to bend myself into that shape for a long time, because that was what I kept being told, like online from like writing kind of guru type people that you ought to do. But my brain just doesn't work like that. I don't like working like that. And so I had to kind of come to terms with the fact, a lot of this is me talking about me coming to terms with the fact that my brain works strangely. Like I am very much an edit as I go person. Um, I like almost always, and this does become challenging with longer projects, like before I go and write new stuff, I go back and reread what came before. At least like to the beginning of the chapter. Like once obviously I've got, most of the way through the book, I can't kind of like continuously every day reread and reread and reread. But I do reread a lot. And it works for me. Like there's certain challenges that crop up because of it, but I like to get my lines, my words kind of as perfect in my head as I can at that stage. It's not to say that I won't edit them more later because there's a lot of editing that comes in later as well. But I am not a messy first draft person, and my attempts to write messy drafts tend to really stress me out, because I find that my investment in a project comes through in the process of crafting those sentences. And so if I'm not spending time, I guess, like perfecting the voice and the rhythm of the book, like I can't get as invested in it. It doesn't feel real, if that makes sense. Like it's um the character doesn't feel real. None of that really comes alive for me. So it has to be like at least relatively solid. Even if I know I'm gonna change stuff. Um that said, like I did for sure edit afterwards. So I was lucky having come off a writing mentorship program called Pitch Wars. I was lucky to have a few critique partners that I developed, close friendships with through that program. And one of them, he was really helpful in the early stages. Like he noticed a problem with some of the stuff that I was writing, just in terms of like, potential plot holes and that kind of stuff, or logic holes, I guess. Like, well, why isn't the character doing this? Or like, that kind of stuff. And so he was able to help me address that early on enough in the process that I could like make those changes before I'd finished the book. Um, and we worked really well together, reading each other's stuff as we were writing it, which I know is not the usual way that you do that. But I worked really well with him, kind of brainstorming things. And then after the book was actually finished, I passed it on to my partner along with other CPs, and they helped me kind of like fine tune stuff in a uh, more common sort of a way, I guess. Like, and then I got into another mentorship program called Query Fest, and the wonderful Marianne Marlowe was my mentor, and the book was really, really long. Like it's not tiny now, but it was like I think it was like 162K or something. Um, and so she helped me very painstakingly, laboriously to cut it down word for word, word by word, I should say, so that it's like it was like 119K by the time we'd finished, I think. And then when I decided to publish it, I put a few things back in, and so now it's like roughly 123K. So that's sort of more or less, I guess, what the process looked like for me. Like, there's quite a lot of like variety in there in terms of what I was doing, and every book has for sure been different for me every time. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad I asked you this question because, the listening to how other writers do things is really valuable. And like you, I edit while I write, and
Yeah.
I cannot do like a messy draft. I, I feel like it helps me in a lot of ways, and that I don't know, I almost feel like I am co-creating with another part of myself kind of
Oh,
like I'm in this sort of relationship with the past me who wrote this, and then I'm
right.
going back and editing, and I am keeping that like consistency of voice across the work. And I think that that really helps me stay in the story and with the characters in a way
Yeah.
that if I was just doing like a messy draft, I think I would lose some of the threads. It's like I have to keep putting myself back into the story. And so editing as I write allows me to do that. And I have a lot of like other like esoteric thoughts on the writing process that I won't get into, but I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one that does that. And for people that are listening, I think it's important, like if you're thinking about writing or if you are a writer, to really find what works for you. And like you said, Steve, you had to come to terms with doing something that went against all this advice that was out there. And, yet that was the magic that helps you write.
Yeah. 100%. And like, I just want to say, like, everything you said there really resonated with me in terms of what you get out of that process and the sense of immersion and just like I think that's what it is. Like you are talking to this past version of yourself, and it um you're also kind of sinking deeply into the world of the story. Or that's my experience of it. And that's not to say that people who write or edit a different way aren't doing that. I'm sure many of them would say that like they're not able to sink into the story unless they just keep, like unless they're
Mhm.
like go, go, go. But again, that's the importance of like not taking to heart too much like any advice that says you have to edit in a certain way or you have to write in a certain way. But just to like find what works for you and experiment and let yourself be open. Um, like you might try something and it turns out it really doesn't work. But like whatever process it is that gets your creativity going or like encourages you to get those words down, like that's what you need to lean into. Um, you know, yeah, unless it's like methamphetamines, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, okay, let's not yeah, so please do not take away from this that, you need to do, like, a Hemingway or, like,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. As long as
um
it's not self-destructive, then like follow your bliss in terms of, yeah.
Yes, I always feel like you can't go wrong with, the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. So, know
Yeah.
thyself as a writer and go with that. And okay, so a little more grounded, down to earth question then, with writing craft, what kind of tools do you use to write and then to edit?
Yeah. Um, it's not a very interesting answer, probably. Um, I use a word processor most of the time. I one of them, not the Erstwhile Tyler Kyle, but my other novel, The Wings of Ashtaroth, which is an epic fantasy. I wrote a lot of that by hand, actually. And sometimes if I'm having writer's block or something like that, I still find that like writing by hand, especially if I take myself out of my house into somewhere that I don't normally write, then that will help me to kind of like get the words coming. Um, but with Erstwhile Tyler Kyle, I wrote it all like in Word. These days I use LibreOffice to try and escape from like potential scraping of my work. Um, and then for editing, I just yeah, I sometimes what I will do once I'm like really late in the editing process, sometimes I'll print out the whole book and then I'll go through it. I'll read it as a printed manuscript because that helps me to catch like typos or awkward phrasing. Um, and another thing that's great there is also like reading aloud. Uh, especially to make sure that that sentences flow, that they're clear, that they've got a really good rhythm to them. Because I think that's really important and it's sort of under discussed and undervalued aspect of writing. But my tools are mainly like the computer. Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely hear that in the erstwhile Tyler Kyle that, it had this sort of like cinematic narrative quality
Oh,
in a
cool.
way, and, definitely read very smoothly, like someone's, train of thoughts, or if, someone was doing a vlog about what happened to them
Right.
in this situation. An elevated vlog, let's say.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, well, let's get back to a another kind of like big overarching question. So, another kind of pattern I've noticed amongst trans writers, and I mentioned pattern because I'm autistic as fuck. So like a lot of my thinking is like finding connections between things and then wondering about, okay, what's this pattern going on here? So I've noticed this pattern with some trans writers is there's this tendency to really blur genres.
Mm,
I The Poison Fruits is a horror romance. I am writing a romantasy with mythology in it, and I know that's not really that unusual. Other people do that, but I enjoy blurring genres. And in the erstwhile Tyler Kyle, we have horror, we have comedy, we have this really Lynchian surrealist element that occurs throughout it. And then you've also written, as you said, fantasy. So speak to us about kind of writing between genres and then within a single novel beyond genres or blurring genres.
Yeah, I love that question, and I also love your analysis. And as a fellow like pattern seeker, like it really appeals to. Um, yeah. So yeah, like I think the funny thing is on the one hand, I always like kind of state in, interviews or just like random posts I make online or whatever. Like I love genre blurring things or I'm not super fond of the term genre defying because that
Mhm.
feels kind of weird to me. Um, but like yeah, genre blurring, the blending of different kinds of influences, that kind of stuff. But when I actually kind of like sit down to write something, I don't necessarily sit there and think, I am going to blend these two genres. It's rather that like not to get too romantic about it, but like that the idea of the book as it kind of like gestates in my mind, sort of naturally develops different valences, I suppose, that are interacting, that are merging. Like for me, the feel that I wanted the Erstwhile Tyler Kyle to have was really particular. And it was a kind of fusion of a lot of different things that had influenced me or were important to me. I definitely set out intentionally to write a horror novel, but it already kind of like felt as though it innately knew what it was. Like it had this weirdness to it. Um, the comedy aspect kind of came out of the voice really right away. Um, and this sort of, yeah, like you mentioned, the Lynchian surrealism, that kind of aspect to it. Like I feel like in a big way for me, it's almost like something natural that comes out of the way I write. And I think that actually kind of supports what you're saying about sort of like the inclination of trans writers to seek out, uh, you know, genre blending works or to kind of like work themselves in a space where they're blending genres. And I feel like part of that is maybe because we're just so used to sort of being, again, like you probably overuse this term, but like we're sitting in this rather kind of liminal space in terms of our own identities. Most trans people over the course of our lives, I think we get quite comfortable with existing in spaces and looking at the world in ways that would be distinctly uncomfortable for cis people. And I think there's a recognition that we have of sort of things not being necessarily what they seem, the way things seem, or the way things are being allowed to kind of like occupy seemingly contradictory states, while actually those things are like perfectly able to coexist. As well as sort of just the way that, whether we're talking about identity or genre, or any other aspect of the world, really, like we'll have this sort of like additional layer to it, or several additional layers. So I think it's sort of a combination of those things, maybe a predisposition or something that we're gradually able to develop. Yeah, like a sort of feel for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I feel an attraction to the unknown and
Mm,
a sense of safety with the unknown. I feel like if I I feel like the most terrible fate would be to literally be able to know everything and
mm,
have no mystery left and have, no I both interior and exterior horizon that you're like, what's beyond? I don't know. And I like that I don't know. And I don't know that I want to 100% know. I've just used that word so many times. But
yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
the numinous, and it's interesting because I haven't thought about it the way you said in terms of, uh, kind of the discomfort that the predominant cishet culture would have with, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with cryptids, that, you know, something doesn't fit in a box. What do we do? And
Yeah.
for me, that's what I want. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't want something to fit in a box. And so I think this conversation has really helped me understand part of my kind of attraction to what I read and what I write. And it's, and I would say like get romantic about it. I think people need to be, I always, I will say certain things to people and I'll be like, well, I'm a romantic and not like a movie. That's not what I'm talking about. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. And so, I'm just kind of, this has given me a lot to think about in terms of, this certain sort of, I guess, I don't know. I don't really know how to articulate it, but I feel like I'm on the verge of thinking about something really new about trans writing and kind of how it works. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna think about this more. So
Yeah. I think it's like there's a working through that I think happens depending on sort of like who you are and where you are in your life, like working through those feelings of being liminal, that sort of attachment to the unusual or being outside of a category or a box. Like for a lot of us, it's not an easy process. Like for some people it's like I think automatic, but I think too there's definitely a lot of people where it's the case that they want to fit into the box, but gradually over time realize that's not going to be possible. And so, like sometimes I think art of whatever kind, whether you're engaging with it as an audience or you're engaging with it as an artist, is a really great place, a really fecund place to kind of explore that and to kind of allow yourself to start to get comfortable with, okay, like, the edges maybe aren't so clearly defined. Some of them are sketched in a little bit, and like maybe you can dip your toe outside and yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and it makes me think about what we were saying earlier about you kind of like speak to your past self and write yourself back into the story, like as even like my editing style of like, and what you were saying, editing as you go, and that there's something in um that's in this that is like that. And yeah, it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah, I think it's all very sort of process based, I guess, and experiential. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah, like just the writing like that or editing like that is similar in that you're devoting a lot of thought and energy, I think, to something really particular, or that's what it feels like. And I feel like the process of identity formation is a little bit like that too. That sort of like looking inwards, trying to, ask yourself questions like, who am I? What am I doing here? These sound like the titles of like kids, like, um, what's happening to my body? type books. But like, um, like it's questions that don't necessarily have a clearly defined end. And I think like what you were speaking to about getting comfortable with things not having clear answers, with a kind of like numinousness in terms of the world and being excited by that. I feel like that's a bit interrelated there as well. Uh, and because the thing is like even if you don't want to know, the truth about everything, capital T truth about the universe, as
Mm.
though that is something we could ever do, or such a thing exists. Um, it doesn't mean that you don't ask questions about it, and it doesn't mean that you don't want to know. Like those things can kind of like sit beside each other, that need to know and that need to kind of like maintain curiosity and to find out, along with happiness at the knowledge that you're never going to. To me, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That there's just for me, being able to name or ask or form a question in a way it gives me an answer, even
Yeah.
if I don't find a definitive answer to that question, and I would probably often resist wanting to find a definitive answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like there's a quality of in my life of feeling like I dwell in the liminal or make a home in the
Yes.
liminal, which is this
Yes.
contradiction, right? Like, but it's
Yeah.
not a contradiction to me. It makes perfect sense in my mind because
Yeah.
it's part of this bigger uh, framework that is I'm a very visual spatial thinker, and so I feel it. Like I feel like and I feel like I write from that place, I think. And I don't think until we had this conversation that I could identify it like that. So
Well, at
um
least, yeah, I think like I've told this anecdote before, but like years and years ago, I was taking a class with a grad class with a professor who I still speak to and is really lovely. Um, and he's very intelligent. Um, and said a lot of things to me that I think helped me figure out stuff about myself, to be honest. But I do remember in one of his classes, like we were talking about liminality, and I said I can't remember the context, but I said something about like um, liminal people and what it is or what it means to exist liminally as a person in the world, specifically in the context of transness and feeling liminal. Um, and I remember he said something about how he didn't think it was possible to permanently occupy a liminal state. Um, but I actually think I disagreed at the time out loud with him, and I disagree now. And I don't know if he would think this now. But yeah, like certainly, I think trans people, and I imagine a lot of other people from other marginalized backgrounds probably have experienced it to some degree as well, although we obviously all experience it differently. But certainly I feel like somebody who is permanently liminal. Like I don't
mhm,
think I will ever live outside of that space. I think whether we're talking about sort of material liminality in terms of, gender and its physical parameters, however we define those, or we're talking about psychological liminality, um, a sort of like sense of ourselves as sort of like occupying liminal spaces socially, whatever it is. I think like at least for me as a trans person, I don't think I will ever not be liminal. And
mhm.
so a lot of my interest, I think, in liminal things, monsters, um, you know, spaces that are hard to define or that exist in between states or places, everything that sort of like gestures toward the spooky in a lot of ways. I think that is always going to speak to me innately because of my sense of myself as sort of belonging in that space.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I feel I really, relate to a lot of that. And, I think writing fiction is a great way to uh I don't know if I want to say like make that more real or embody it, but
Yeah.
there's something about fiction that lets writing it and reading it that if it's the right kind, if it's the kind that aligns, that gives a space to explore that and maybe sort of reinforces maybe it's not what I want to say, but like allows us to stay in the liminal, but that's where we belong, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think I extend it too to just a sense of like, as an audience member or as an author, like any kind of fiction, maybe even the sort of reading of nonfiction as well to an extent, is a sort of temporary entry into a liminal, obviously not literal space, but space in the broader kind of idea of space, but an entry into a liminal space simply because of that state of suspension that you're entering.
Mm.
You're physically still in the world, maybe, depending on
Allegedly.
yeah, allegedly, yeah, yeah. Depending on whether or not it's like the Necronomicon you're reading, I guess, and it's transported you to some other like, Lovecraftian realm or whatever. But excluding that, you're physically in the world, but your mind is really in this sort of other place, especially if it's like a good book, right? Or it's a good movie, or it's, doing whatever it's aiming to do successfully in transporting you. Like just the language even that we use to talk about the way that we can consume, quote unquote. I actually hate that word. I should have avoided it, but the way we engage with fictional narratives really is evocative of the liminal. Like that sense of like you're going somewhere else, you're traveling, you're moving through another space. Um, you're entering into another world, you're leaving the world of the cinema, whatever it is, right? Like the sense that the cinema or the boundary lines of the book, whatever it is, that those things are demarcating a journey, right? Like a stage when you start off in one place and you end up somewhere else. And maybe you come out of it, or maybe you get sucked into the book forever. But um, what lies between is this sort of liminal stage of like neither in the world, not you're kind of nebulously traveling these pages or this screen or even sort of engaging with a um, visual art or something like that. Like when something captures us, we've been ensnared into this other realm temporarily.
Yes, and I think this also helps me articulate this sort of mystery I've had for a while of knowing that I hate finishing some books, and
Yeah.
I will like drag out, and there are some times where I can't do it and I just have to read like the entire thing, like because it's just got me, it's gripped me too hard and I just get upset because I'm like, I don't want to finish this book. I don't want to leave the me who is experiencing this. And I'm kind of going through this right now with this book called Forest. It's a nonfiction and it's called Forest Euphoria: The Abounding Queerness of Nature. And it's by Patricia, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Patricia Ananawu uh, Kaishian, and it's just exquisite. And I'm reading it as slowly as possible. And uh, I don't want to finish reading it.
Nice. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm really gonna have to check that out because some of my research actually in my thesis is like about queer engagement with nature through the monster. Um,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So I'm definitely gonna have to check that out 100%.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, let me know what you think about it. So,
yeah.
okay, well, um, I I will bring us once more into this podcast is a liminal state, and if you're listening to it, you're in a liminal state. So I want to make everyone aware of that. But so as you kind of think about this is good because I guess it is related because it's a journey question. So tell us about your journey into indie publishing and what that looks like for you going forward.
Right. Indie publishing is really exciting. It was also like a really kind of rocky road to get here. Um, so I definitely like grew up very starry-eyed in terms of like traditional publishing. Like I had this like grand vision of like what the publishing world was from childhood on, that it was
Mhm.
like, as somebody who wasn't popular in school and, felt like an outsider in a lot of ways, not just because of my identity, but because of things to do with like my interests, just being like a bit nerdy and weird and all that stuff. Like, I always thought of it as like, but that's where all of those characteristics are valuable. Like, publishing is this, realm where like everybody is at least somewhat like this. We all value, you know, difference, and I think people's unique contributions to art and having new ideas and exciting ideas, that kind of stuff. Like I figured like people just published airport fiction and all of this generic stuff because they felt like they had to. And they're like um like, but really everyone was super passionate about like, like they'd recognize when stuff was like really original and what they would want to publish. And that's not to say that there aren't people who like that, because there absolutely 100% are. Um, but the harsh reality of publishing is like a business, as something that is much like everything under capitalism, so oriented around money making and just sort of like not just money making, but easy money making, like,
Mm.
wanting books, wanting to pick up books that look enough like what came before that they feel like there's a guaranteed sale. Even if people read the book and are disappointed because it feels so similar, like if they can get people to buy it, that's the main thing. The idea of authors is kind of like just, you know, almost machines to keep churning out books that are really similar to one another, and then not supporting those authors as they're like, into their sort of sophomore book or whatever, because they, like there's a million other eager debuts that they can just snap up and have them do the same thing again. Like all of that
Mm.
sort of felt really crushing, and it's still something I think I'm reckoning with, sometimes rather gracelessly, I think, in terms of like how I talk about publishing, which makes me feel guilty because there are so many great people in the industry as well. And I don't mean to kind of slander those efforts, nor the efforts of authors who are traditionally published. But yeah, like I think querying for years and years and years, I came to realize that like everything as it was set up was just so anathema to what I wanted it to be, or what I wanted to be as a writer. Um, I don't want to constantly be doing the same thing, either as anyone else or as myself. And I am a trans person, and for a lot of people, that probably was very much a negative, whether they sort of realize that subconsciously, or realize that consciously, or if it was more of a subconscious impulse. Um, and after having received, I think the main thing for me was like why I wouldn't have just jumped to publishing is like myself, like independent publishing was just a sense of nervousness about like, well, am I just deluded? Like, am I actually talented? Am I actually skilled at this? My writing probably just needs more work. Like I'm very good at sort of self-deprecation, and also like it feels counterintuitive to me to like be really pushy about when I think I'm good at something. Like I always have an innate kind of need, which I think is probably cultural, to just like, demure or to be really. It's not the way, especially with the US centric publishing market. That's not the way you're supposed to be.
Mm.
Um, but sort of like with feedback from others that my work was good and it was ready to be published, it just like they just didn't know where to place it in the market, or they already had a queer book or whatever it was. Like I decided that I was going to start saying yes to myself and not rejecting my own work, and to see the value in it. A big part of it also was a sense of like mortality, um, and just like I needed to put my work out there because you kind of never know what happens, right? And like with things getting increasingly hostile as well, like, you know, that I think is something that I think about a lot, and I feel more comfortable with my work being out there. Uh, in the indie space too, like I think my initial concerns I would have had about going indie were related to like misinformation and ignorance I had about the indie publishing world, particularly the self-pub world, that it's all people who can't edit or can't be bothered to edit, or their works are really derivative, or like they're filled with like spelling mistakes, or um, just like yeah, and that's really not the case. Um, there's an extent to which traditionally published authors, are a bit more privileged in terms of having a multitude of, you know, professional editors, if they're lucky, to help them really smooth and polish their work. But a lot of indie authors do put in the work, are very talented, and there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening in indie spaces, and especially for trans authors too, because we're so underrepresented in the industry. Um, yeah, so then I independently published my books, and I guess that's the story. Yeah. Yeah, that was like a really circuitous answer. Um,
No, no, that was wonderful because I'm sure there are people listening who, might be on the edge of, deciding like what do I want to do? Do I, I want to write, but that have similar thoughts. And for me, I kind of just fell into reading uh indie trans authors because that's what I was looking for. And I had spent a couple of decades not reading fiction except for manga and graphic novels. So I just couldn't read novels. I could not, I mean, aside from ones that I read for my first master's degree, but I just couldn't do it. And I realized it was because it was all of these cishet stories. And I just was like not interested. And manga, and graphic novels, you can get away from that and you can find. And then I was like, well, where are all of the novels that,
yeah.
have people like my wife and have people like me and our friends. And, I finally found that in the indie space. And I'm to the point where I feel a little suspicious now about traditionally published books. And I actually prefer reading, indie and small press, and just love it because I get to see people like me, people like my wife, and read these just amazing stories that I love and I've come to really love. And so that's actually what got me over the hurdle of, starting to self-publish. And,
Mm.
you know, so as we close, this last question is really along those lines of, for someone listening who's kind of thinking about doing this, what advice or encouragement would you give to other trans writers who haven't started that self-publishing journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a big thing is, deciding what you want to do. Like that sounds really simple, while being very complicated, because, like there's nothing wrong with traditionally publishing your work or wanting to be traditionally published. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to be traditionally published and preferring to publish either, self-publish or publish with a small press. But I think sitting down and really thinking through the pros and cons and what you want to do. I do think there's a lot of scaremongering around self-publishing. Sometimes there's scaremongering around trad for those who haven't queried
Mm,
before as
yeah.
well. But there's a lot of help and support, no matter what kind of, what path you choose. Because you don't have to reinvent the other people have been and done this, in terms of working out like marketing strategies if you're self-pub, or how to format a book, those kinds of things. Um, so, like I would try to, and similarly, like for querying, there's a lot of really great advice out there. Free advice too. Like you don't have to pay somebody for advice on how to write a query. In fact, I please don't, like unless you can afford it. So, like take advantage of those free resources. I'd say community building is huge in indie.
Mm,
Um, like just setting up a network of people, finding other indie authors whose work you genuinely like and who you're on the same wavelength with, which I realize is easier said than done. But often like joining like, whatever social media site you're on, if you're on one, like little hashtag interaction things like horror writers chat. I run one called SFF chat, science fiction fantasy chat. Um, or like, there's work in progress snips where you post like a snippet from your work in progress every day. Like gradually, like you see similar faces cropping up, similar icons. You start to interact with one another. Maybe you see someone's work, their snippet, and you really, really like it, and then you read their book, and then you reach out to them, and maybe then they read your book and you become friends. Like, that's a nice little ideal scenario. But I would say like seek out community even in unconventional ways. And yeah, like trust in yourself, like try and balance a humility, like a knowledge that you're not always going to have the answer, you're not always going to be right, even in terms of editorial choices. Um, and recognize the importance of the need to edit and to get sort of feedback from somebody else on your work is very important. But like simultaneously with that, recognize your worth. Um, if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. Don't dream it, be it, in the words of
yes.
yeah. Um,
One of my
yeah,
life mottos, actually.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So, like I think most people like I've spoken to like quite a few trans authors who were thinking about self-pub or thinking about trad or whatever it was, and like they always seem so much more anxious and so much more nervous that they might suck than cis authors do, and it's really
Mm,
sad. And
mm,
I suspect many of them are so much more talented than they realize. Your perspective is really valuable, and the things that you want to play with, the genres you want to play with, whatever it is you want to do, it doesn't matter genre, it doesn't matter if books are full of trans pain or trans joy, or maybe they don't have trans people in them, or maybe all of the characters are trans, or maybe there's no human book. Whatever it is, like that you're passionate about, I think people will make space for you if you make space for yourself. Um, so try your best to do that, I would say. It's a lengthy piece of advice.
yeah, no, that's wonderful. And it's like, make the space and then take up the space.
Yes,
Like
yeah,
occupy the space. And that was something that I had to learn. And I want to echo also what you said earlier, say yes to yourself. So
yeah,
trans writers that are, even if you don't think of yourself as a writer, you very well could be. So do it.
yeah, exactly.
Say yes to yourself. This, that's such a great statement that you made earlier.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed, talking with you.
You
And,
too.
I look forward to having you back for some future liminality.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so I will include links in the show notes, but if you'd like to just highlight anywhere people can find you, please share.
So I'm mostly only on Blue Sky in terms of social media now. But I'm Steve Westenra on Blue Sky. I do also have a TikTok, but I genuinely only use it so that I can make videos and put the music I like on the video and then post it on Blue Sky. It's like my video creation software, basically. Um, and my name's Steve Westenra on there too, some variation of it. I always come up because the last name is a common one,
Yeah.
and it's a pen name too. I should say it's not my real name, and I think that's it really. I think that's all the places I am. My books are available wide. The Erstwhile Tyler Kyle is available in paperback. You should be able to order it from like Barnes and Noble or Indigo chapters, like whatever your brick and mortar store is. Like if you've got a local indie store, they should be able to order it. But you can also get ebooks everywhere, basically. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you for joining us, Steve. So check out the Erstwhile Tyler Kyle, and I will be back with another interview coming up soon. So thank you for listening.
Yay. Thank you.